Hi, this is Mr. Cordes, and this is the part 2 video for the Scarlet Ibis symbol chart. Ladies and gentlemen, we pieced together these first 3 rows discussing the symbolism of the birds within the Scarlet Ibis short story. So we took a look at, in the first part, where's the bird being mentioned, so textual evidence. We've got examples for the oriole, the owl, the cardinal, the peacock, and the Scarlet Ibis. Okay. In the first video, went on to instruct what does the bird represent. Whenever we look at symbols, there's one item that represents another concept. So looking at how that item or that image or that object is being used, and then how does that translate to the character and to the story that's being told. So for us, there's lots of mentions of birds, and they each mean something different in the context of the story. So what does the bird represent? We talked about the oriole representing like the approaching seasons, the time of change. For the owl, we represented or looked at how it represented death or knowledge. Okay. Particularly in this scene, this is where Doodle goes up to the barn. His brother's like, "That's the coffin you were supposed to be buried in." And he has to go touch it. Right. And so there's a lot being exposed here about the life that Doodle wasn't supposed to be having. Right. So death and knowledge is connected with the owl. We have the cardinal. The cardinal's in reference to kind of like the pompous, overbearing bird that just says, "Hey, ladies, here I am. Come and get me." Right. It sticks out. It puffs out its chest to show the red feathers underneath. And so the sense of pride or overconfidence is being projected, especially on the narrator in this moment, because the narrator wants to feel pride for having a normal brother, but he doesn't. And so he kind of pushes himself with that feeling of guilt and shame that are connected with having a handicapped brother. You'll also notice for the peacock, it is referenced that was beauty or perfection. As Doodle and the narrator began to tell stories and make up lies and do all these wonderful things together as siblings, the bird itself represents beauty, perfection, being whole, being accepted. This right here was when Doodle kind of just desired to be normal, right? He's always desired to be normal and be accepted, but this kind of pushed us beyond. Now it's in his subconscious, so he's always feeling like he's inadequate. So the peacock really represents that perfection in which he does not have, and that beauty which he does not see himself as. The last one that we identified was the Scarlet Ibis, referencing to death or being an outcast. That bird was not supposed to be where it was. It was brought in from the hurricane. And so it was kind of the odd person out, just like Doodle. And so one is the concept of death. It was crippled from the beginning, just like our protagonist. It was it died instantaneously, just like our protagonist. And so here the Scarlet Ibis means the concept of death or being an outcast. All right. You will also notice, ladies and gentlemen, even though I have these 3 empty boxes, in the last video, you were required to fill those out. You will be using the Scarlet Ibis primarily for your writing, but then for your other paragraph, you will need to write either about the peacock, the cardinal, or the owl. So you get to select one of those. So it's going to be very important that you have those filled out. Okay. Now today, I'm going to scroll down. Today, we are going to go over what does this symbol, how does this symbol relate to the character, and how does this symbol function as an example of our theme? So we're kind of now making bigger connections to our story. I'm going to walk you through the oriole as well as the Scarlet Ibis. Your goal will be to fill in these boxes here, okay? But when we look at our characters, when we look at the context of the story, how does it relate to the other things around it, okay? Authors purposefully put things into a story for them to develop a character, develop the plot, to enhance the setting. They're not just randomly put in there. And so looking at the oriole, Okay, I'm going to move myself up over here. Looking at the Oriole, this kind of begins to mirror Doodle's death. Okay, if you look in the context of how it's being used, the Oriole's reference to like an unattended nest, right? It's kind of forgotten, it's empty. The idea of starting over, remembrance, and mourning. So how does this symbol relate to a character? How does the Oriole relate to Doodle? We can put down that, let me get my cursor in there. We can mark down that Doodle's death mirrors the empty cradle and how he was dead to his family before even living, right? In the very beginning, they talked about having to make a coffin for him. And so as soon as he's born, they're just kind of like, well, he's going to die. And there's no care and concern or love or compassion for him. Right off the bat, from the new beginning of a new life, they kind of already just be like, yep, we're going to start out. We're just going to scrap this one. It's not going to be good, right? So the Oriole, how does the Oriole relate to our character? It relates because Doodle was already dead before he even started living to his family, okay? They looked at him and didn't really even give him a chance. So that's how we make those connections. So if we were going to look over here at the Scarlet Ibis, how does the symbol relate to a character? What we could put down is that obviously the Scarlet Ibis, it's obvious. Even the narrator says it at the end. He's like, I huddled over him, sheltering him, my fallen Scarlet Ibis from the heresy of rain. Like he looks at this bloody red mess in front of him and he's like, oh my gosh, this is my Scarlet Ibis bird that I have mistreated for, his entire life. So here, let's mark down that the Scarlet Ibis represents Doodle's handicap. There we go. And displacement within the family. And I use the word displacement because that coincides, ladies and gentlemen, with what the bird represented. So the bird represented this idea of being an outcast. And so he was displaced within his family. They didn't even bring him into the front room to like sit with everyone until he was months old? Well, might as well bring him part. He was still alive. Might as well have him be a part of the family. So right here, he was still displaced. Okay. And we can identify that. So take a moment, ladies and gentlemen, let's fill in our items for the owl, for the cardinal, and for the peacock, okay? What are the relations to our character? So the owl is going to represent Doodle, and the peacock is going to represent Doodle, but then also the cardinal is going to represent the narrator, okay? So if we mark down, how does the symbol relate to a character? Here you've got, how does the owl relate to Doodle? How does the cardinal relate to the narrator? And then how does the peacock relate to Doodle? Okay. Take a moment. Let's fill in those three. You can go ahead and pause the video and fill in those three. And let's look now, ladies and gentlemen, now that you've had a chance to fill that in, let's look at this last row. How does the symbol function as an example of theme in our story? Okay, how does this actually work? So when we go through this, we're piecing things together as far as the bigger concepts. So yes, this story is about two brothers. Yes, it's about loving on the handicapped and including them. However, what's the bigger message, right? It's about love, acceptance. It's about the theme of death is very prevalent, right? Looking here, how does the symbol function as an example of theme? For the Oriole, it talks about how death was from the beginning, okay? Death was from the start of Doodle's life, right? It represents he could never escape it. He could never escape death. So even at the very end, when he is running as fast as he possibly can because of the storm, he still realizes, oh, this is, he can't escape it. He can't run. Okay. Same thing goes for the Scarlet Ibis. Okay. The Scarlet Ibis represents death as well. We see that when it dies in front of Doodle. It was inevitable because it was handicapped. It looked sick, right? Right here, ladies and gentlemen, let's mark down that the Scarlet Ibis represents death, foreshadowing what will happen to Doodle. Okay. That's what we really see. That's what we really get out. And then it's confirmed at the very end when the narrator says that his brother looks like the Scarlet Ibis. Okay. So this may seem a little bit more difficult, but you look at it, there's a lot of connections. So the owl represents this idea of death as well. So how does the owl represent a function of death for Doodle, right? That was the first time that he was exposed to the fact that he should have died. That's when his brother was like, hey, you were supposed to be in this coffin. You're not supposed to be here. And that's his first bit of information, like, wait a second, what is my life supposed to be then? And so that's his first interaction with that. And of course, it pops out and it scares him. And so it's quite shocking, right? The cardinal will represent more of the narrator. The narrator is so prideful. He's so, I don't want to use the word arrogant, but he's so determined to make his brother normal that it's hard for him to see anything else, right? When he does finally walk on his own, he was crying because he did it for himself, not for Doodle. He was so ashamed of having a crippled brother that he taught him how to walk, right? And so the false confidence is shown through our narrator, right? With this idea of guilt and shame. Okay. The last thing that we have is the peacock. So how does the peacock play into this desire for Doodle to be accepted, to be loved, to be perfect? He, in this moment, has already learned to walk, to run, to climb trees, to row a boat. He's done a lot. And yet he still feels like he is not perfect. Okay. I mean, the doctor said that he was going to die. The kid's rowing a boat. At this point, he's doing great, but he does not see himself as doing great. He still sees himself as less than perfect or less than beautiful. So what does that really mean here in this sentence? Okay. Take a moment, pause, go ahead and fill in these three boxes. If you have not filled in these three boxes, get those as well. Okay. Now, at this point, ladies and gentlemen, you should have your entire chart filled out. Okay. Don't be overwhelmed whether it's right or wrong. Right now, the idea is you got your thoughts out of your head, and we were able to pull them apart and look at them from a distance. Okay. I tell a lot of my students, when we're analyzing literature and we're trying to understand what things mean, we have to pull it apart first for us to be able to see the image. Okay. So looking here, you now have this entire chart filled out. When we come back, we're going to begin to construct our paragraph using the information that you see here. Okay. And I'm going to show you how to place things where in the structure of a body paragraph for what we have learned before. Okay. Once again, if you have not had a chance to fill this out, please do so. If you are lost, message me and we will piece things together. But overall, nicely done. Talk to you guys soon when we do our writing.